Welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon. The Force is strong with this one.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 91. I wanted to just quickly add in here that I am tackling the third volume of the Poe Dameron comics by Charles Soule in this episode. I'm not tackling another High Republic comic this episode. I believe I will be tackling some more next week. It's just I've been reading the High Republic comics for the third wave of the first phase, and I'm just trying to work out what order it's best to do it in so there's minimal spoilers for you listeners, but I will delve into those details at the end of this episode. And if you haven't tuned in before, make sure you check out episode 85 of Star Wars Comics in Canon, because that's when I tackled the first volume of these comics, and check out episode 88 of Star Wars Comics in Canon, because that's when I tackled volume 2. And if this is your first time with Star Wars Comics in Canon, hello there. I'm going to go through each of these comics' plots, and while I go through that, I'm also going to tell you the various connections to other Star Wars content, either via the characters, or the species, or planets, things like that. Just kind of connective tissue. So you can listen to this instead of reading the comics if you don't have the time or money to be able to pick them all up, so you still have a good understanding of the canon. Or if you've already read these comics, then listening either serves as a refresher, or may point out some of the connections that you may have missed. So with that in mind, let's get into some of the details. So this is the third volume of Poe Dameron. The trade paperback collection of this includes issue 7 as well as issues 14 to 19. The trade paperback collection is called Legend Lost, however that is the story arc for issues 14 to 16, as issues 17 to 19 have the story arc War Stories. So the writer for these comics is Charles Soule, the artist for these is Angel Unzueta, and the colour artist is Arif Prianto. Now I will add in here that I'm not going to be specifically tackling issue 7 in this. In a moment I'll explain why and I'll give you some general plot details of it, but the personnel for issue 7 are the same, except for issues 14 to 19, Arif Prianto is the colour artist, whereas for issue 7 it was Frank D'Armata. So issue 7 came out October 2016, issue 14 came out May 2017, issue 19 came out September 2017, and the trade paperback collection came out November 2017. These issues all seem to take place around 2 years before The Force Awakens, so in the timeline that is approximately 32 years after the Battle of Yavin, which is approximately 28 years after Return of the Jedi. So just before I read out the crawl and delve into issue number 14, I just want to elaborate on issue number 7. So issue 7, as I said, is part of this trade paperback collection, and it's still written by Charles Soule, and the artist is the same, etc., but it doesn't necessarily add anything, and considering I'm already tackling 6 comics in this episode, I didn't want to add a 7th if it wasn't necessary. Now, issue 7 is 32 pages long rather than the standard 23 pages long. It's basically just an origin story of how Poe kind of knows Suralinda, who's a character who's going to come into it in issue 17. So after issue 16, when we get to issue 17, I'll give you guys a little bit more information on Suralinda and that general story, but it's going to be very, very brief because, in all honesty, I just reread it just to make sure there's not a huge amount that goes on, and it's quite a hefty comic, so I didn't want to, spend loads of time talking about that. So I will start with the crawl for this collection and then delve into issue number 14. It is a time of uncertainty in the galaxy. Standing against the oppression of the First Order is General Organa's resistance, including Poe Dameron and his team of pilots, Black Squadron. Poe Dameron and his team have recently emerged from a bittersweet victory. Through a combination of luck and skill, they defeated the ruthless crime lord Terex, although in the process they lost one of their own, grizzled veteran pilot Leia. Terex was taken prisoner by his former employers, the evil First Order, who intend to punish him for defying their commands. Now, back at the hidden resistance base, Black Squadron and their comrades have come together to mourn their loss, while in a First Order prison cell, Terex awaits his fate. So issue 14 starts on the resistance base as seen in The Force Awakens, which is on the planet Dakar. You've got General Leia Organa standing in front of Leia's coffin, or casket, whatever you want to call it, and she says a few words and then asks his commanding officer to come up and say a few words, who is Poe. So I'm just going to read what Poe says because I think this is actually some really beautiful dialogue, and I think it works not just in the Star Wars universe but outside of it, so I thought I'm going to read that out. So, this is Poe speaking. These days, we don't talk about the Force that much. I don't know if it's gone out of fashion or if it's just harder to see around us. It was different for me growing up. We used to tell stories about the Force all the time, and I'd like to tell you one now. I heard it from an old friend of my family, someone who understands the Force as well as anyone alive. She told me about an old Jedi she knew, one of the very last. He was as strong and as tough as any of them, and went out fighting evil just like Luulo did. She was there when it happened, and she told me his body just vanished. Empty robes and a lightsaber, that's all that was left. She didn't get it, didn't understand, not until a long time later when she was talking to her brother. He's a Jedi too, and he told her something he'd learnt from his master. We are not this. We're not just flesh and bone, not just stuff. We're more. We're luminous. That's what he said. This coffin's empty. A lot of empty coffins in this business. That's how starfighter pilots go. 1 second we're there, the next we're just atoms drifting through the universe. We vanish, just like that old Jedi did. But that doesn't mean we're gone. Luulo was pretty much my uncle. He helped raise me since I was a kid. He was cranky, kind, strong, and one of the best pilots I've ever met. If he saw a way to help someone, he'd take it, and he'd never turned away from a fight against the bad guys, no matter the odds. You want to talk luminous? Luulo Lampar was about as luminous as they come. The stuff might be gone, but he's not. I can still feel him, right here, shining away. May the Force be with you, Luulo, and with all of us. So yeah, I just thought that was really beautiful and very nice. So we move on with the rest of the comic. It shows that Terex is in a First Order cell. He wants to speak to Phasma. Meanwhile, Poe is now fixing his ship. He's not at the wake for Luulo, he's just eager for his next mission. So Leia speaks to him, gets a debrief from Poe about the whole mission, and Poe is unsure about Oddie. He doesn't know if he's a traitor or not because although he seemed to betray them, he did also help a lot, but obviously he did leave too, so it's a bit peculiar. Back to Terex, it shows that he took the memory chip from C-3PO, but the First Order took a look at it and it's just completely useless, because the memory chip was completely fried when BB-8 stunned Terex in the previous issues. Phasma says to Terex that he has one shot to convince her that he is useful, otherwise he's going to go into the mines, so basically into slavery. Back to Dakar, you got Leia who grounds Poe. She makes a comment, calls him Flyboy, which is a nice little reference to Last Jedi, and she asks him what his biggest value is to the Resistance. He says he's the best pilot. She says, well, that may be true, but no, that's not what I'm getting at. Think again. Poe can't really give an answer, so Leia says, look, until you can give me a proper answer, you are grounded, so go have a think. So Poe sort of ponders and things, and walks around the base and things, and then talks to Jess, part of Black Squadron. She gives him a hug, speaks about Luulo a little bit, and then says that his speech really helped her. It helped push through some really negative emotions, and she wasn't sure she'd really be able to get through it. But because of Poe's words, she feels inspired. So now we go back to the First Order and Terex. Now I'm going to read out Terex's dialogue here, because it's just quite interesting, and paraphrasing it wouldn't work that well, and I can assure you guys there's no more of me reading anything else verbatim in this episode. I know normally I only read maybe one occasionally on episodes, so it's quite weird me doing 2 in the first issue, but it's just some very good dialogue in issue 14, so I'm going to read that to you guys now. So Terex is speaking with Phasma, obviously trying to convince her to not throw him into the mines. We are right. Everyone else is wrong. The same is true of the Empire. That was why I served it, and why I fought so hard to try and bring it back after the Battle of Jakku. That effort failed, but here, with the First Order, I see a new hope. I did not have to offer my services to you. I was king of the underworld. Coming to the First Order cost me a great deal, and I gave it up willingly because I believe what we are trying to do. There is a right way for the galaxy to be run. Safety and peace comes from order. It comes from control. Freedom is a drug. And lesser-minded beings can become addicted to it, ruining their lives and the lives of everyone around them. The Empire knew how to dole it out in strictly controlled doses, providing the illusion of freedom more than the reality. This was a good thing. People cannot be trusted with their own lives. The First Order must gain control over the galaxy, or the galaxy will fall into ruin. No one else can do that. We are right, and everyone else is wrong. So after that, Phasma agrees, says everything you said is true, you are committed to the cause, and your mind is full of useful information. So Terex's like, oh, good, I'm not going to the mines then. And she was like, no, not the mines, as a couple of stormtroopers come up and grab Terex. And Terex is yelling, where are they taking me? And Phasma says, it's as you said, Terex. Some people can't be trusted with their own lives. So once again, some very strong dialogue written by Charles Soule, and I think that me reading both of those out shows a very good comparison between the Resistance and the First Order and the kind of mindsets and things. Obviously, they're slightly different scenarios, but I just thought it was a quite good counter, having Poe's beautiful speech about La'ulo and the Jedi and life, and then Terex speaking to Phasma, basically trying to say, yeah, people shouldn't have their own freedom because they're stupid and they'll make the wrong decision, so they have to be forced to make the right decision, which obviously is a dictatorship and is not how the world or anyone's life should be run. So just a few more details here before issue 14 ends. After Terex is taken away, it cuts back to Dakar. Leia and Poe are talking, and he thinks he's figured out what importance he has to the Resistance, that he inspires people, that he is like a leader, and he needs to kind of use that for the benefit because people need morale boosting. Leia says that's correct, and also confirms that she will be luminous one day, so she needs someone else who will be able to step up to the plate. And with that, she ungrounds Poe. So the final panel of this comic shows that Terex has got some sort of implant on the side of his head, and his voice has now got a sort of metallic, droid-like sound to it. So obviously he's got some sort of chip to make him under the control of the First Order. So that's where issue 14 ends. Let's move on to issue number 15. It starts with Admiral Statura speaking with Leia. Now, Statura's full name is Ashos O. Statura. He's played by Ken Leung in The Force Awakens, and you'd recognise him because in The Force Awakens he's the person who says that they should try and take out the thermal oscillator on Starkiller Base, which should in theory blow up the whole thing. He was obviously correct when he made that call, and then he dies off screen in The Last Jedi, much like many other characters do, like Admiral Akbar, much to many people's chagrin. But back to the story, you've got Statura and Leia confirming that they're running low on supplies. Primarily fuel is what they're running out of, and all of their contacts who normally supply them with fuel are disappearing. They only seem to have one left, who is someone called Perilli. Now, Perilli is a Xexto. So a Xexto is a 6-limbed species from the planet Troikan. You first saw them in The Phantom Menace. There is a pod racer called Gazgano, and then the species has appeared in the comics as well, which is the Dr. Aphra comics. Specifically, one of the Xextos is called Sister Six. If you want to find out more information about Sister Six and Dr. Aphra, if you don't already know, episode 34 is the first batch of Aphra comics that I tackle, and episode 46 is where Sister Six is in it. So back to the story, we've got Perilli on their own ship, and she heads down to a hangar. She's waiting for the Resistance to appear. Normally what happens is a Resistance ship appears, then Perilli and her crew leave whatever ship they're on with all the fuel, the Resistance comes, picks up the fuel, then Perilli kind of gets on with her and her crew's day. But they go down to the hangar and then this peculiar ship appears, and Perilli is quite suspicious of this. Before they can really do anything, some First Order troopers run off the ship and then start shooting. They kill Perilli's crewmate, who collapses to the floor, and then Perilli's just left there with her hands up. A woman who is a First Order officer named Malarus confronts Perilli, and then it cuts back to Dakar. Leia tells Poe that she can only authorise fuel for one ship, because obviously they're so low on fuel. So he goes and talks to Black Squadron about it, and then they decide to split the fuel between 4 fighters. So they'd all have very low fuel, but having 4 fighters with a bit of fuel is much better than just having one ship with full fuel. So back on Perilli's ship, you've got Malarus who is interrogating Perilli, accusing her of providing fuel to the Resistance. Malarus then goes on a bit of a rant, talking about how the First Order is important and that you can't sell things to the Resistance, even though it is technically a free galaxy at the moment, but things are changing, that sort of stuff. And Perilli says, look, I'm trying to make a living, I'm trying to do business. And so in response to that, Malarus says, we'll make you a better offer, and then gets her stormtroopers to just shoot Perilli. Back to Poe and Black Squadron, it shows that they find Perilli's ship, they land on there, and while the rest of the crew kind of look around and things, Poe goes up to the bridge. Poe starts to fire up the ship so he can kind of move it so he can get the fuel to where it needs to go, and BB-8 says that the ship is actually a bomb. It turns out that now that the ship has started accelerating, that it cannot slow down, so the ship has to just continuously get slowly faster and faster, and obviously that is a reference to the film Speed. The ship then has to go through an asteroid field, and the shield is starting to get damaged by this, and so the other members of Black Squadron jump in their ships and fly around the ship, and then shoot at the rocks and asteroids and things that are bouncing off the fuel ship. BB-8 then confirms to Poe that the First Order not only turned this ship into a bomb, but also they took all of the fuel out of the ship, so it's actually completely useless. So Black Squadron decide that they're going to get their fuel back from the First Order, and that is where issue 15 ends. So we move on to issue 16. Issue 16 starts with the shields on the freighter are starting to fail. The other ships have managed to defend it quite well, but they are all running out of fuel. So they all then dock in the freighter just as it clears the asteroid field and just as the shields fail. And I want to clarify, me saying freighter, I'm referring to the ship with fuel on it. I realised that I kept calling it a fuel ship rather than a freighter. Poe says they're in a bit of a tricky situation because if they slow down, then the ship will blow up, but they're continuously going faster and faster, and eventually the ship is just going to rip itself apart. So they decide they want to still steal back that fuel, but they're a little bit unsure how, and obviously they are running out of time. BB-8 then confirms that he was actually tracking the First Order, because the fuel that they've stolen is traceable due to its energy signature. And it seems that the First Order ship actually needs a hyperspace ring to use hyperspace, because it doesn't have a built-in hyperdrive. Then it shows you what the First Order are doing. So the First Order ship is nearing the hyperspace ring when Black Squadron's ship then approaches. The First Order then launched lots of TIE fighters, and Black Squadron managed to fuel up from the freighter, which is something they didn't really think about prior. So all of their ships have now got full amounts of fuel, and they fly out and start to attack. There's a couple of funny comments that Terex makes, where he says there's like a 97% chance of failure to Malarus. She questions Terex, being like, how could that possibly be the case? And he says, well, if Poe went against you by himself, there would be a 67% chance of failure, so with Black Squadron it just makes it even more. She obviously isn't very happy with Terex's comments, but she just ignores them. So Black Squadron's starfighters manage to fly past this First Order vessel that's got the fuel on it, and they destroy the hyperspace ring. Poe then comms to the First Order officer on board and says, look, you and the First Order can all escape the ship right now in the escape pods. We will not shoot them. You are free to go. However, we are getting this fuel one way or another, and if you are on that ship, then you may die. So the First Order officer then contacts Malarus, who's on their ship a little way away, not quite in the battle zone or anything, and says, can I have some backup, please? And Malarus says, no, you can't, because this is a higher security vessel for the First Order. If we do engage the resistance, then it's going to start the all-out war, which we are not ready for. So you have to figure something out. So the First Order officer is like, no. Turns off the communications device and then contacts his crew and says, we need to leave. Get on the escape pods, let's go. So Malarus is obviously furious about this, and in her fury she smacks Terex, who bashes his head against a wall, but it is confirmed that the First Order officer who left the ship did actually set off a self-destruct timer, hoping that it will blow up the resistance when they get aboard. So Poe lands his X-Wing onto the ship, BB-8 scurries out of his X-Wing immediately, goes over to a nearby port, and then turns off the timer for the ship to self-destruct because Poe said, it's pretty clear that they're going to do something like that. BB-8 seemingly manages to stop the timer, but then a ship blows up. It confirms that the ship that blew up was actually the ship with the bomb on it, and it shows that that was just being controlled by one of the Resistance astromech droids, and that there were no humans or other life on board. Black Squadron are all pretty chuffed with themselves, so they head back to Dakar with the fuel, saying that we won. So that's where issue 16 ends, so let's move on to issue number 17, which is the story arc War Stories. But just before I delve into that, let me give you a little bit of background information on the character, Suralinda, and issue number 7 and what kind of went on there. So in issue 7, Poe Dameron meets Suralinda at like a bar place. They get shot at quite a lot when they're like talking and whatnot, so they run away, and then they escape a few things, and they get captured, and the First Order gets them, and they manage to escape that, and then Poe takes Suralinda to the Resistance base because she said she had some very important information about the First Order that she wanted to give to General Leia Organa directly so she could get paid for the information. They then get there, she speaks to Leia, and then she has a change of heart. Then it shows that what actually happened was that she planned the whole thing. So Suralinda was a journalist, and the idea was to find out the Resistance base to then release it as a story on the newspaper that she worked for, and the whole shootout and fighting they went through at the cafe bar place they were at, that was all orchestrated by her. She paid mercenaries to do that and to kind of shoot around them, make sure they didn't get hit and things, just so she would get closer to Poe, and then he would trust her more and stuff. The First Order abduction, I believe, wasn't intentional, but it helped anyway. So when she gets to the base, she then confesses all of this to Leia and Poe and says, look, I'm really sorry, I was going to do this, I haven't done that, but I can see that the Resistance is incredibly important, you're all really good people, so you can lock me up or do whatever you want to me, I'm not going to tell people, but I really just want to help, even if it means just cleaning stuff for you, please let me help. So that is a real brief run through of a 32-page comic. There are some cool action scenes in it and things, but yeah, I didn't want to run through it in as much detail as I have with the other ones because it's literally just an origin story for Suralinda. And then if you're also reading the comics along with me, either you'd have already read that one, or when you read the 17th issue, which obviously I'm about to go into, in there's like 2 or 3 lines from Leia, which really briefly confirm everything I've just said. So it's not a necessity to read issue 7. If you're reading through all the Poe Dameron comics, then go ahead. It's not a bad issue and there's some cool action, but it's not necessary by any stretch. But Suralinda, she is actually a Squamatan, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Squamatan. These species are blue-skinned, they can spit acidic venom from their teeth, and they were enslaved by the Empire. The majority of them were actually killed. Now, they were enslaved by the Empire because the planet that they were from actually had a lot of thorolide on it. Now, thorolide is a substance which I've only recently known about because it's only in a couple of canon Star Wars stories, and where it was first introduced is A New Dawn. And A New Dawn is a book which serves as a kind of prequel to the animated show Star Wars Rebels. It shows how Kanan Jarrus and Hera Syndulla meet. Now, I'm listening to the audiobook of that at the moment. I'm about 2/3 through it, I think. It's pretty good. If you want to hear my review on that, then make sure you become a Patreon supporter. I'll go into more details about that at the end, but I put certain book reviews that are non-High Republic or even some Legends book reviews onto my Patreon. But that's really all the information you need to know about the Squamatan species, aside from the fact that the name Squamata, as in outside of the Star Wars universe, is actually a grouping for reptiles that include lizards, snakes, and amphibians. So it comes from a real-life classification for creatures, which I thought was quite interesting. But yeah, so that's the brief on Suralinda and the species. So with that in mind, let's move on to issue number 17, which is the first of the 3-issue arc called War Stories. So it starts off with Poe telling Suralinda that Leia wants to see her. At this moment, Suralinda is cleaning the toilets, and I don't think I've actually really seen toilets in Star Wars very much, and seeing someone clean it with like a standard mop is quite an interesting thing. But Suralinda speaks to Leia, and she is skeptical to allow Suralinda to help due to, all the things I said. She was going to betray the Resistance, etc., but she ended up not doing it. But Leia's confirmed that they basically need money for everything aside from fuel, because obviously last arc they got fuel. So obviously the Resistance needs to get ground crew and food for people and ships and all kinds of ordnance and etc. to be able to continue fighting the First Order and prepare for the war that is inevitable. And the way they normally get these is actually getting donations from either richer people or senators and things like that. But Leia confirms that people don't really seem to care about the Resistance as much. And some people even believe that the Resistance is dangerous due to so many senators who now support the First Order in the Senate who are rallying behind the First Order, saying they're not dangerous at all and accusing the Resistance of stuff. So it's a bit muddy at the moment, and Leia just needs to sway public opinion. So because Suralinda was a journalist, they asked for her opinion on how to do this. So Suralinda says there's mainly 2 ways you need to do this. The first one is to show that there's good people, hard-working people in the Resistance, and they need to have like a face of that. And the other thing they need to do is show how bad the First Order are. You can tell people how bad the First Order are, but people will eventually just tune it out. You need to actually show them doing bad things. And obviously the First Order are quite careful about how they act around certain groups of people and things, so they're going to need to be quite clever about this. So while this conversation is going on, it goes and shows you what the First Order are up to. So it's got that person, Malorus, who's in the previous few issues, and she puts this strange extract into her eye. Now, the extract stimulates intelligence, growth, and slows aging in humans. It makes her eye go completely black, apart from her pupil or iris goes white. It looks quite bizarre because one of her eyes has got a red iris and the other one has got a white iris, but the pupil and the actual eye itself are black. And she puts these drops injection thing into her eye, and then her eye bleeds a little bit. So it's quite unnerving. But it's confirmed that it was from this native species and they used to use it as a mild anesthetic, but in humans specifically it does all the things I just mentioned. She has got Terex plugged into a machine to find out more about Poe Dameron. Terex says that he could just tell her, but she says that he is a renowned liar, as in before he had this implant thing, so she'd rather just plug him in and know for absolute certainty rather than being concerned that he may be lying to her. And it's also confirmed that Phasma has given her full authorization and the resources to back it up to destroy Black Squadron. So, back to Dakar. The Black Squadron member, Jess, has to fly Suralinda in a Y-Wing. And Kara will go with them as well, because Snap and Poe are going to go after Oddie, because obviously they think he's a traitor. So let me give you a little bit of information about Y-Wings. So the Y-Wing in this issue specifically is actually a 2-seater Y-Wing. It is the BTL S3 Y-Wing Starfighter. It is 8.5 meters or 28 foot wide. It is 16.24 meters or 53 foot and 3 inches long. This 2-seater variant was first seen in the Weapon of a Jedi book, which I think is also a comic as well. And the original Y-Wing is called a BTL-A4 Assault Starfighter, or Assault Bomber. The standard one is in A New Hope. It's the same sizing that I mentioned, the meters and the foot and things. It's just that it only has one seat. Not quite sure how they managed to make it exactly the same, but regardless. So yeah, going back on track with the story. So while Jess, Carrie, and Suralinda are on their way to their mission, Jess isn't sure about the value of propaganda. Sura then gives some explanation saying, a lot of the time with war, it's not like one story, it's two stories, and generally whoever wins the war, their story is the one that is told throughout history. Sura then asks Jess why she likes to modify her ships that she flies because of a comment that Poe made earlier, and Jess confirms it's because of control, and it shows just a one-panel flashback of Jess and her family in a ship with another much bigger ship approaching them, and that gets slightly revisited in an issue or two's time. Jess confirms that Sura asks a lot of questions, and Sura then says, yeah, I do, so here's some personal information about me. And she gives the history of her species that obviously I've already told you guys, but also confirms that she specifically wants her species to be remembered for something other than just, oh yeah, the Squamatan, yeah, they were enslaved by the Empire and then all just died out. She wants to have an actual legacy for her species. Suralinda then asks about Oddie, and Jess and Kara then say, yeah, he was a traitor. Kara says that he put trackers into their ships for the First Order, but no one is really sure why. They thought that he was their friend. And then it shows you what Oddie is actually up to. So Oddie is with his wife, Soa, and they're on the planet Abednedo, which is where their species comes from, and they're basically getting their things. Then the First Order show up, grab Oddie and take him away, and then Malorus tells Soa to tell Poe something or they'll hurt Oddie. Meanwhile, Sura, Jess, and Kara land on a planet, and Sura says she's going to send out a camera probe so they can kind of watch the First Order and see what they're doing. These look quite similar to the probe droid that Darth Maul uses in The Phantom Menace. I seem to recall in Star Wars Battlefront 2, not the Canon game, the Legends game on PS2 and Xbox those years ago. It looks a little bit like that. It's just like a floating orb that has a video feed. That's what she's been using. And the last panel of issue 17 shows that the First Order are killing the natives, or rather they shoot one of the natives who collapses to the floor, and then the issue ends. So, on to issue 18. So, the First Order officer that just shot one of the natives says to the natives that they need some Thorolide, which powers the natives' technology, so the First Order know that the natives have it. The natives confirmed that the Empire tried years ago, and the natives just refused. The natives confirmed that what the Empire does is make a deal with people, give them some money and things, and then eventually the worlds get burned and the children get enslaved, so the natives just refused to help the Empire, and the Empire just left. Sura is watching this interaction on her video drones and tells Jess and Kara to not shoot the First Order because they need some footage. Try and think about the bigger picture before acting rashly. So it shows you what Snap and Poe are up to. They managed to find Oddie's wife, Soa. She confirms why Oddie betrayed the Resistance and how he sort of did it. It was all for love and all for her because, she was enslaved by Terex, which is confirmed in, I think, the previous volume of these Poe comics. Poe and Snap ask where Oddie is, and Soa says that he's on a mechanic's job, but she doesn't mention the First Order. Then, on the First Order ship, it shows that Terex is interrogating Oddie. Oddie thinks that Terex's implants are hilariously ironic, saying that he actually could help. He could literally remove the implant, stop its hold over Terex, but he doesn't, and he won't. Oddie is getting shocked by Terex while he's in this interrogation chair, and Terex holds a tool right near Oddie, and Oddie continues to say he's not going to help Terex at all. Then it goes back to the native planet, which it gets confirmed in the next issue, but I'll just say it for ease. It's called Spalex, and the planet isn't anywhere else in the canon or legends. So on the planet of Spalex, the First Order are preparing to shoot even more natives. Before they can do this, Jess and Kara then shoot the troopers, and then a big shootout occurs. Jess gets shot in the side, and then Kara is captured. Sura doesn't want to fight, but does grab a gun, and then as soon as she turns around after picking up the gun, she is surrounded by stormtroopers and is then captured by the First Order. She offers the footage that she took of them killing natives for freedom and also confirms that Jess and Kara are part of Black Squadron. Sura is saying that she wants to make a deal. And then the final elements of this comic are that Snap and Poe are nearing this First Order ship. They are approaching and they have a little discussion about Oddie where Poe is still a bit unsure how to feel about it all, whereas Snap is very angry at Oddie, saying that even though he found out the reason why, love and a wife is not worth throwing the whole of the Resistance under the bus for. It's not fair, it doesn't undo the damage. Poe is not quite sure what to think, and then it shows that Oddie is still resisting torture. The First Order then identify that Snap and Poe are coming towards the ship, and Malarus is like, wow, that's really good, amazing, all we need to do is get the other 2 members of Black Squadron. And then the same First Order officer then says, well actually we've just captured Jess and Kare on the planet of Spalax, so we actually seem to have all of Black Squadron, and Malarus says that it's her lucky day. So that's the end of issue 18, so we move on to the final issue of this volume, and that is issue number 19. So Poe and Snap have clearly landed on this First Order ship, they immediately get captured and they get thrown into the brig or jail. Malarus says that once she's got all of Black Squadron together, it's torture time with a smile on her face. She then tells the stormtroopers to slice into the Resistance ships and then tells Terex to kill Oddie. Meanwhile, on the planet of Spalax, Suralinda confirms that she has a plan. She's tied up currently with Jess and Kare, and she said that she only told the First Order who they were because otherwise they would have just been killed because they wouldn't have been valuable. But because they're valued, they were kept alive. Jess makes a comment saying she hates being in cuffs, and then you see a panel of her and her family captured by what looks like pirates, and then it flashes back. So it seems like we're getting drip-fed a little bit about Jess's backstory. Sura continues by saying that she actually has loads of drones still recording in the sky. She only handed over 1 to the First Order, and what she needs is for Jess and Kare to run to cause a distraction, as she has managed to get them out of their handcuffs. So back on the First Order ship, Terex pulls a blaster on Oddie, because obviously Malarus told him to execute him, and then he starts somewhat resisting the urge to shoot Oddie. And he keeps repeating the same thing coming from the implant, and it says, autonomous activity detected, administering countermeasures, and then he gets electrocuted as this happens. So obviously whenever Terex goes against what his chip is telling him to do, he gets electrocuted, and it gets worse each time that he doesn't follow these orders. So as he's getting electrocuted, he pulls his gun away, and he manages to crawl over to the station that is controlling all of Oddie's constraints and whatnot, and he manages to set Oddie free. And then he shows him on the screen that Poe and Snap are being held in the brig. Terex then collapses to the floor. So back to Spalax. Jess and Kare are running away, and the First Order officer stops stormtroopers from shooting at them as they run away because he was told that Malarus wants to capture them. A trooper then goes up to Suralinda and is questioning what she's doing on the floor and not handcuffed and things. She says she just had cramp in her leg and then manages to press a couple of buttons on her little computer thing and then uses these video drones to dive bomb a whole stormtrooper squadron. And it looks really cool. You've got these like orbs that are just falling from the sky and just decimating all these troopers. The First Order cruiser that has got Malarus on it as well as Poe and Snap then appears on the planet of Spalax. Jess and Kara see it and then just yell run and start to bail while they're getting shot at from quite high up. Snap and Poe's cell door opens and then an alarm sounds, meaning that a nearby group of stormtroopers leave the area. It shows that Jess, Kara and Suralinda are running away from 2 TIE fighters and a Lambda-class Imperial shuttle. So the one I always compare, I say it's basically a box with 3 fins on it. You see it in the original trilogy a lot. So while Suralinda, Jess and Kara are running away from these ships, they are continuously being fired upon. It shows that Terex and Malarus are in the Imperial shuttle, and Terex says, I thought you wanted to question Black Squadron, and she tells him to shut up. As Jess, Kare and Suralinda are running towards the ships that brought them to this planet, the TIE fighters blow up their ships, so they are now stranded. Then, when all hope seems to be lost, the TIE fighters then explode, and it shows that Poe and Snap are flying their X-Wings. The First Order cruiser then lets out loads of TIE fighters, I counted at least 15 of them, pursuing Poe and Snap. Poe and Snap are trying to outmaneuver and things, and then one of the TIE fighters then starts shooting the other TIE fighters, and it is confirmed that it is Oddie. He confirms that he got Poe and Snap out of prison, that he caused the distraction and things, that he's the reason they managed to escape. They have a little bit of back and forth. Oddie confirms that he's really sorry for what he did, and then he heads for the First Order cruiser. And the last things that he says to Poe and Snap is, I loved you guys. Oddie then flies into the hangar and is shooting everywhere and destroys the First Order cruiser from the inside. Terex then has an odd smile, and Malarus is absolutely furious but also quite scared considering there's basically no First Order left. So they escape in the shuttle. And then the final parts of this comic show that Suralinda actually had 1 drone left, and the drone managed to record a little bit of the footage and some of the craziness that has just happened, and also recorded some of the transmissions. She confirms she'll use it to tell the story of Oddie, a hero pilot of the Resistance, who did everything for love and sacrificed himself, and Poe is like, but that's not exactly, and then Suralinda says, true, grow up, Poe Dameron, there's a war on. And that is where this comic and this volume ends. So my friends, thank you so much for listening. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you. So let's get some information of what's coming up and some of the other things I'm involved in. So I think that next week I'm going to be tackling the final batch of High Republic comics. This means that there are going to be some mild spoilers for Fallen Star, which is the final book in the High Republic Phase 1 Wave 3. I've almost finished the book. I'm not quite there yet. However, where I was reading the comics alongside it, I can confirm that where the comics end is only about a third to halfway through Fallen Star, and anyone who's paid attention to any of the press regarding Fallen Star and the final wave of the first phase of the High Republic knows that a certain big event happens. Now, that big event that occurs really is the only thing that kind of gets spoiled in those comics, so they're going to be the next things that I tackle. I'm then hoping that I will have received the last of the High Republic Adventures comics, but it just depends because my supplier said they're still awaiting the stock in, so I'm not too sure, because I don't really want to tackle Trail of Shadows, which is the miniseries, until I finish the High Republic Adventures comics, because the Trail of Shadows, the final issue, somewhat spoils the end of the High Republic Adventures comics, so I'm kind of hoping that I'll be able to finish the High Republic Adventures comics and then see how much is actually spoiled and how much of it is relevant to the plot, so I kind of see it there. I'm obviously hoping that I can get Fallen Star book review up as well, but obviously I need to finish the book before I can do that. Then there's the Eye of the Storm, 2 issues that I want to tackle, as well as the Edge of Balance stuff that I want to tackle, and I was mistaken, I thought Edge of Balance Volume 2 came out in March, it is actually in May, so I'm going to have to kind of see what it's like the week after next of how much I finished of Fallen Star, and if I can get a book review out, or if I'm going to end up tackling something else. Obviously, I said I'm going to try and do the Crimson Reign stuff that I did similarly to the War of the Bounty Hunters, so that might be the thing I do in a couple weeks' time, but that's generally where I am at the moment. Hopefully in the next month or two, I'll be fully up to date with most of the High Republic stuff, as well as I'll have finished the Poe Dameron comics as well, and then we can kind of see where we stand there. I've obviously still got some of those Vader's Castle miniseries to do, so I did one of those batches in October as like a Halloween special, because they're always released at Halloween, and there's currently 3 of them. There's Tales of Vader's Castle, Return to Vader's Castle, and Ghosts of Vader's Castle, so I'm fairly tempted to tackle one of those soon. So that's kind of where I'm standing at the moment. Next week will be the High Republic comics, and then after that I will probably do Crimson Reign, and then the week after that I will hopefully have finished Fallen Star so I can do that book review, and then from there hopefully I'll then be able to do the High Republic Adventures comics, which means I'll then be able to do Trail of Shadows, and I know that I can't do the Eye of the Storm until I have done Fallen Star book review, so there's lots of things that are sort of tangled up together that once I get the Fallen Star review out I can kind of be a bit more free, but that's where we are at the moment. Then what else is there to mention? Well, there's the usual guest spots that I'm involved with, which the details of those will be in the description. I was on Star Wars Timeline quite a few times, and I'm also going on there again, I believe, next week to finish off our accents conversation. So we did a discussion on the accents of Star Wars that was very interesting, a perspective that I hadn't even really considered till I spoke to Ben about it, so we're doing a part 2 of that, and then I'm sure we're going to do more conversations on Star Wars Timeline in the future. In addition to that, I'm hoping in the next few weeks to be on another podcast as well, but we had to delay it because one of the hosts had COVID. And then I was also on the 4th episode of the Comics in Motion Book Club, where we spoke about the first volume of Neil Gaiman's Sandman, so that was really cool. That's on the feed of Comics in Motion, so if you're listening on a podcast app, you should just be able to type that in, or just click on the link in the description, it'll take you to the Spotify one. So they are the general guest spot stuff I've been up to that I can speak about. And then aside from that, it's really just supporting the show. So you can rate on Spotify without even having to write a review. But if you want to give me a review, that would be lovely. You can do it on Apple Podcasts or Good Pods or most of the podcast apps and things. That would really help with the feed of Comics in Motion. And also it would help Genuine Chit-Chat if you did it for either of those. But in addition to that, if you've already done that, or if you don't fancy doing that, you can share the episodes on social media, which would be really handy. You can talk to your friends about it, which would be also very handy, and I appreciate it greatly. But there's one other way you can support the show, and that is financially. You can contribute to my Patreon, which is patreon.com/genuinechitchat. So if you give as little as £1 a month, then you get access to the audio exclusive feed. That means you get access to at least one episode of Afterthoughts that me and Megan do every single week. In addition to that, I released exclusive book reviews on there. So they're Star Star Wars books which are not released on this main feed. They're not quite as in-depth as the book reviews that I release on this feed are, but I make sure that on this feed you get all of the High Republic content, but I'm doing some of the older Star Wars books. So I've done Last Shot, I've done Dark Disciple, which are 2 canon books. I'm currently listening to A New Dawn, which I mentioned earlier, which is going to be released on there as well at some point. I've also released the Legends book review of Shatterpoint, which was Mace Windu. I've also read Darth Plagueis, and I've recorded my review of that. I just haven't edited it and put it together, so that'll be coming out over the coming weeks as well. So if you want to hear my thoughts on a couple of Legends books and a couple of non-High Republic canon books, then you can check those out as well. I am planning on doing the Darth Bane trilogy at some point soon as well. I've heard the Rogue Squadron books are really good too. I also must confess I haven't read the Heir to the Empire trilogy, which is sacrilege being a Star Wars fan and saying that, but I'm hoping they're going to release those on Audible soon as well, so I can listen to those on my commutes and stuff and do reviews on those. So my book reviews on Patreon are going to be primarily Legend stuff with just a few of the kind of smaller books in the canon as well. So if you want even more Star Wars content, you can support me on Patreon there, as well as getting the Afterthoughts episodes I do with Megan, where we've done Star Wars reviews, Harry Potter, the MCU movies. We're also doing a lot of new movies that are coming out, and we're doing a Tom Hanks rewatch at the moment. And if you want to dip your toes in and see what it's kind of like without having to pay anything, you can click a link in the description, which is bit.ly/TomHanks1, or you can just type it into a browser, and you get to listen to the first of the Tom Hanks rewatch, which was Big, which Megan had never seen before. So if you listen to that and you enjoy it, then you can consider supporting the show fully, and you get access to loads and loads, just hours and hours of additional content every single month. And, it supports the show, and it helps me out a great deal. Helps me afford all of these Star Wars books and comics that I buy to do this show, and obviously for my own personal enjoyment. But a couple of people have recently joined that Patreon, which I'm hugely, hugely thankful for, but obviously the more the merrier. But that's going to be enough from me, guys. Thank you as always for listening. I appreciate all of you a huge, huge amount. I'd give each of you a massive hug if you were here and, COVID allowing and making sure, none of you are ill to give me ill. But aside from that, just thank you for listening. Please share with your friends if you can. And I'll talk to you guys next week with the next batch of the High Republic comics. And as always, may the Force be with you. The intro for Star Wars Comics and Canon is arranged by myself, Mike Burton, and the backing music was made by Eric Matias of soundimage.org.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars Comics and Canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.